Appalling Lies and Inspirational Missives from Anglesey. By William Kerwin. Part 3. Article 21. This is the subsequent week's talk, given by Mr. Arnold Williams. University of the Third Age, Carmel, Anglesey. March 2003. Titled, When Omens and Signs Fail, the Universe Will Intervene. A policy decision was voted on and accepted, subsequent to this talk by Mr. Williams regarding the use of expletives in conversations. It was decided that when appropriately employed, then certain expletives are acceptable. The rule change referred talkers and lecturers to warn listeners in advance of any bad language, so that they could place the cups of tea down in good order. Both Miss May Jones and Mr. Arnold Williams gave cause to much merriment, spilled tea and visits to dry cleaners. Mr. Williams's words. It wasn't necessarily a time of omens, and yet they were all around me, screaming desperately on so many fronts in my life. I smoke. I scream inside. I drink. I scream inside. I eat badly. I scream inside. I barely sleep at night. I scream inside. Relationships. I scream inside. Work. Dear Lord, but I scream inside. Yet I say that I can no longer hear them, which is an appalling lie. No. I no longer choose to hear them, because to acknowledge them might invite a frightful disaster, and I will be unable to cope with changes that I will have to confront and commit to. It took many years of dedication to achieve this stable state. And that's all we want at the end of the day, a stable life, as secure as possible from the unexpected. Is that not so? There was a sigh of relief when I reached the age of 43, because I knew that if a war were to be declared, then I would be too old to be conscripted. I assure you that I would not be one of those brave souls who would volunteer and lie about their age. I learned to be exhausted of conflict early on, as I moved from one pretty good job to the next, desperate to escape any sense of routine and familiarity from the people around me. There is no unique conversation between 9 and 5. We all gather around the same water cooler of despond and utter our hatred of the system. We bind ourselves too willingly to anything that we can use as an excuse not to confront obvious options and solutions. The mundane is our security, and the familiar sight of seeing that fear in others further cements us to inconsequential responsibilities, and despise those who have left for their adventures. They fall out of our conversations so quickly. It becomes too uncomfortable to wonder where they are today. Not so long ago, a friend was savaged by a gentle resident's so-called friendly dog. Almost down to the bone, which was far too close for me. I know this, because I happened to glance down and saw it scream red and raw for my attention. As she cleaned it, a caring nurse told her it would hurt. And as predicted, it did. And there were encouraging yet appalling observations like, the ligaments look fine. We held each other tighter at that point and stayed like that until a doctor was found and painkiller prescribed. I exercised enough self-control to eventually let her go. Once you begin embracing someone you care for, it's surprising how addictive it becomes. My friend had been dithering about making a common sense and long overdue decision. I told her that what had happened in a sense, was that the universe had confronted her, well up front and personal. It hadn't bothered to give her ideas to reflect on, but simply said, "Stop. That's enough prevarication. Admit that you've had enough. Bastards are not worthy of your intelligence and dedication. If I must get a dog to nearly rip off your finger to focus your mind and to acknowledge the whispers in your heart, then so be it. I'll do it. Again. If you won't change, then get ready for some tough love." The omens must have breathed a deep sigh of relief, and credit to them, they did persevere. The omens are always a series of ducks organized in a tidy nice row, saying, "Attend to me and my helpful blunt subtlety." Be aware that fear of change only increases the fear of change, and magnifies the sense of guilt and misery, for not having courage to change much sooner. Following the omens and signs is the line of least resistance. Not following dreams invites ill health and tension. The truth is very straightforward and starkly simple. In the end, we will all die. And when the time comes, let us hope that we have done our very best to reduce the number of regrets slipping through our mind. The universe is wonderful, and it pays to pay attention to it. And remember, for when the universe strikes, it does so with wit, intelligence, and a finest aim at a perfect target. A target of which we may not have previously been aware. Article 22. Titled, Thinking Too Much is Bad for You. A talk given by Mr. Geoffrey Hughes in response to the news of the engagement of Miss May Jones and Mr. Arnold Williams. University of the Third Age. Dillers 2003. Mr. Hughes also gave the best man speech at the wedding breakfast. No expletives were employed, but certainly an abundance of superlatives, most of which the new Mr. and Mrs. Williams declared were not true. Nonetheless, they would accept them, as they came from loving friends who always see more of you than you yourself do. Mr. Hughes's words are as follows. The problem with thinking too much is the number of useless and unnecessary variables you bring into any equation, variables that don't need to be part of anything, and should be written on paper and fed to chickens. I find myself in awe of those individuals who can write pro and con lists, and have the confidence to rely on the numbers. My problem is that the list will continue to grow, and once having decided on a way forward, I will refer to it again and again, and end up doubting a decision that in all probability was correct by instinct in the first place. Too much thinking does not allow one to put a problem to rest. If I had the confidence, I would subscribe to the idea that if you haven't got the strength to decide, then don't. It will only be through blind luck that you make the right choice, and you might as well put all your hopes on a lottery win. Thinking too much gets in the way of making the right moves for yourself. It's the same as projecting from the point of seeing someone with whom you could fall in love, to rehearsing the arguments and differences that will eventually separate you before you even got together. It gets in the way of a simple nice meal and making a friend. Friendships last longer and might lead to something. Thinking too much can lead to uncertainty in all things. As a fearful leader will keep his or her officers off balance by fear and constant indecision. Too much thinking leads to indecision and eventual ill health. A calm mind allows positive experience and the unconscious to prosper. During our lives we have experienced many different situations directly or vicariously, and we know that most problems work themselves out if we only trust and leave the situation be. Finally, decisions in love are best made straight away, and the answer in the earliest stages should always be a categoric yes. Article 23. Titled, You only realize that futile gestures have moved you forward when you eventually start paying attention. From a former New York police detective inspector, writing on how he found himself in Northeast Anglesey. 1989. His words read, The problem with futile gestures is that they hurt. They hurt in all manner of ways because they result in what feels like an unfocused waste of valuable energies. Or are they? Sometimes when you find yourself exhausted by life's constant recurring failures, it may be that a scattergun approach is the only rational means of generating new momentum, to move you into a better physical and emotional space. Mind you, if you remain determined to reinforce your exhaustion, then all you will see is another failure to achieve a significant objective, thus increasing inertia. Anything that moves you out of your present situation, even though it might feel uncomfortable, must be regarded as a success and should be acknowledged as such. Your futile gesture has been successful because it has moved you elsewhere. It might not be the elsewhere you wanted, however, futile endeavor in this specific context demonstrated its efficacy. If your objective is to search for joy in life, and you no longer know what joy is, then you must train yourself to appreciate what a buzz is. If a futile gesture that moves you anywhere from where you hate being is accompanied by a buzz, it is significant. It is recognized by the unconscious but missed by the thinking brain. The thinking brain is your worst enemy, for it reviews your new position as being not where you want to be. You may find yourself in a worse position, of your own endeavor. However, you moved. That's the important fact to measure, you moved. Most important of all, is that you have achieved change by your singular or multiple actions. You have influenced the world, it has reacted to your action. Ignore the fact that you may be in a worse position and just focus on the power you have exerted, and have another go. By acting, you have changed your world in infinitesimal ways, and you are beginning to construct a world created from your own actions. Futile gestures are a drunkard's walk. Lamppost. River. Sorry. That's interesting. Wrong job. Wrong friend. That's nice. When does a futile gesture stop being a futile gesture? When the drunkard starts to realize that he is drunk and forces himself to walk in a straight line, and walks himself into a sobriety devoid of self-imposed negative determinism, as it were. I didn't fail the test, I just found 100 ways to do it wrong. The words of Benjamin Franklin. Article 24. Titled, Put the bed sheets on the washing line, and set sail for the day. A lady's reflection on her profound discoveries. 2017. She writes, No matter how many you hang, underwear and socks still do not make a sail. And I hate putting out into stormy seas, and so I rarely set my sails until spring. And when spring does arrive, I wash as many of my white bed sheets as is reasonable in a day, then set them on the washing line to billow. And there are my sails. Set for the day. I am finally awake from the dark cold embrace of winter. Unlike Laurie Lee's mother, I do not spread my clothes on the gorse bushes, thereby I avoid thorny issues at bedtime. And at the end of the day, if the weather has been fair with a good southwesterly breeze, I pull in the main sheets and fold them. Life really is too short for ironing bed sheets and socks. I have met pirates and saints, and treated both with the respect that seems appropriate to that moment. Sometimes I drink with the pirates and then fight with the saints, before dismissing them all. I know that the scudding cumulus, the wind and the sun are the only true companions my heart needs. As the sun sets, I time my little boat back in the creek, safe from storms. I sit content, feeling the gentle rise and fall as the tide of life ebbs and flows. During this day, I have traveled far in my mind and into the world merely by setting my sails. The beat and slap of the sheets has been my metronome, and unconsciously I have attached the beat of my heart to it. In the evenings, my breathing is like the sleeping rise and fall of the cat. And I relax, listening to its gentle snore. It is an escape to those unknown gentler places for which I constantly yearn, a medium of safety from the unwanted and wanton impositions of life. I am approached as if I am both mad and a sage, but I know nothing. I see the fragile crooked lines people live by, and follow them to alternative conclusions that I present for their consideration. I have no answers, which must be so obvious from my own emotional poverty, and I am simultaneously blind to my own crooked lines. Yet, in this newly discovered spring, my own crooked lines resolve themselves to the beat of the sails I have set, and for a short while, I sense hope. I no longer wish to be called upon, and long for more frequent opening of the trapdoor to elsewhere, wherever it might be. When I hear the clack and flap of the sails, I no longer worry about where I am going today. I will always find a haven free of too much thinking. Had I but bigger windows, I would hang out the duvets. Heaven knows where the house and I would then end up. I have waited 79 years for spring to arrive, and now embrace each breath of wind with a simple, indefinable and boundless glee, and do not care that I seem eccentric to my neighbors. Article 24. An injury can sometimes be your guru in drag, and slow you down. Crispin Mayflower, aged 92. He was always full of quotes that made sense later. Titled, Move in Slow Motion, and Drag Your Impatience to a Standstill. Crispin shares. Considering that she is only 5'4", when she lies, and whatever that is in decimal currency or rupees, my friend is one of those truly unique people who, if she cannot sleep, will get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to clean her already immaculate kitchen. Cleaning is the physical mantra she employs to dispel the blues and depression and stop her thinking. Her house, as I suggest, is immaculate. Nonetheless, it is a warm and welcoming place to visit. I now think of relationships in terms of companionship and laughter, and cooking for anyone I care about. Furthermore, I have only recently realized that the magic formula to a decent friendship with someone you love and care for is obedience. Blind obedience. Embracing the spirit of Arthur Mullard, I say. Yes, my dear. For those of you who might remember dear Arthur. The only time I have noticed her decelerate in my company is when we laugh or when I cook, which inevitably amounts to a comedic event. Cooking for someone who eats with such gusto and gives the impression that she'd lick the pattern off a plate is always rewarding. She tells me that some people who suffer a trauma eat anything placed in front of them, especially if it is salty. Talking of salty, my father used to cook Sunday lunch while Ma'am went to chapel. Sometimes the gravy would be so salty that we spoke of selling it as a Dead Sea side product. It would be impossible to drown in my father's gravy. Both of us managed to sit at the kitchen table without mentioning past people we still don't care for. We both outlasted them, and shrugged indifferently when we heard of their passing. We still laugh and we josh, and through it all I notice her inability to sit still because of the way the savage blow now controls her. Impatience is a virtue for my friend because things that must be achieved are achieved. Not so right now, because she cannot even pare a fruit. However, my company is a distraction. I enjoy making her laugh, as it is the only real skill I believe I possess. The more she fidgets, the more it reminds her that for the first time in her life she is not able to control her immediate environment, which is all we ever hoped to do. The universe is going on without your intervention, and history has not come to a stuttering end. For now, let your best companions be a warm duvet, the Radio 4 afternoon play, and that pile of books you complain you never have an opportunity to read. The universe has done you a favor, and is helping you achieve much more of what you wish for. You wanted a peaceful and restful life, where you can read, walk and do countless other things. Slow down and accept the universe's unexpected blessing of an injury. It's probably going to be too busy to come around to you again. If ever. So, Rest and enjoy being idle, and receiving attention that proves you are only invisible in the ways you choose. But we always see you anyway. Article 25. Reverend Richard Pugh. Sunday Sermon at Moriah Chapel, March 1982. Titled, Keep Your Nerve, Because All Things Will Pass. The Reverend's words. No matter how big the problem, and no matter how overwhelmed you might feel right now, it will pass. All things do pass. Whether you live according to the belief you are in a linear or circular time frame. Things begin, become unbearable, and then they have passed. Given enough time, they will become memories that have had the sting removed by merely living beyond the moment. I have heard grief described as a hard ball around which we rebuild our lives. If we do not care enough for ourselves and our damaged hearts, that ball will become rigid and fixed in one traumatic period of our lives. It is a point attached to our present by an elastic band that will rapidly draw us back there. And consequently, it is from back there that we will view and color our current expectations. Once an event has passed, no matter how troubling, it is important to consider what happened. Sometimes we can leave this for the unconscious watcher, the mind's own internal and independent machine, to identify the event's components and rationalize them into acceptable forms. Sometimes they dissipate under the gaze of the unconscious, yet, on other occasions they can only be diminished by being spoken aloud and being given a name. Freud spoke about object. An object is an item with a name and character that can be analyzed free from emotion. If you are a carer, there will inevitably come a time when you will have discharged your duties fully. Invest the time between now and then imbuing every act and gesture for the cared one with the deepest of love. This will save your soul in the long run, because you could not have done more, and you will know this. There will be physical issues to deal with, but they also will pass. We learn from each event. As I write, sometimes we can only give it a name after it has passed. If we are wise, we reflect and identify it as it is occurring. Smarter still, we recognize it as we approach an overly familiar situation. Wisest of all, recognized unconsciously by contingencies we have set up, we do not even notice it, because we never allow the circumstances to become manifest, to develop to crisis in the first place. Therefore, remember, keep your nerve, because all things will pass. Article 26. Anglesey Business Society Monthly Lunch and Lecture. November 2003. The lecture was titled, Life Becomes Much Easier When You Learn That You Don't Always Need to Fight Yourself to Win. This is not a speech that went down particularly well with a number of members of the society. The holistic approach to business, while being appreciated by some, drew the ire and ridicule of the more vocal members of the audience. Sadly, the speaker was unable to persuade these latter individuals to the import of his message, and stormed out after the extended humorous barracking he suffered. Further, the subcommittee for events thereafter decided to withdraw an item on yoga from the social calendar. Here is a segment from the lecture. Most of the battles we fight in life are generally those contrived by others, and not necessarily of our own design. Our own battles are generally fought because of uncertainty, emotionality, ignorance, or even pure vengefulness because we choose, or are too tired to analyze the circumstances and possible outcomes of pointless belligerence. There is a saying that old men fight wars with the blood of the young. For young minds are pliable, and can be motivated with propaganda and stirring martial music. It is only during later years of reflection that one acknowledges the futility of all kinds of conflict. Being in business in a very competitive niche can be extremely intense, tiring, and possibly damaging. And can, if sustained over an extended period of time, be fatal to one's health. Happiness equates with an emotional and intellectual balance, and being aware of irrational passion. While a more rational passion arms us with clear vision, and helps direct appropriate conscious motivation. This motivation invariably enables us to achieve and maintain a focused equilibrium, and thus avoid self-damaging self-directed belligerence. The person with whom you are negotiating should reveal to you your own state of mind, and knowing that the degree of belligerence can be manipulated or deconstructed. It is at this point that the lecturer gave up, and shouted something about a sow's ear as he left the room. Article 27. Reverend Dr. Gwilym Henry Jones. Originally from Penygriegwen, Anglesey. Missionary, 1869. His letter highlights that one of the most important things to learn in any crisis is how to rest. This letter was discovered in the Bangor Diocesan Archives in 1998. and is considered a prime example of the loneliness experienced by many missionaries during the 19th century, who ventured far into what were then regarded as primitive areas of the world, with very little support, other than their faith and prayer. Reverend Jones's letter reads, "Not many people are blessed with a bottomless pit of physical, psychological and emotional stamina. Caring for family, friends and mostly strangers with protracted illnesses pushes a person to unexpected limits. Love, concern and dedication are not immune to exhaustion. Learning to rest, in whatever form, is the difference between maintaining one's own health or not. I rarely panic these days. In fact, without conceit, I would suggest that in any crisis I am one of the calmest people in the room, if not the calmest. Heads invariably turn in my direction and I regularly wish they didn't. There again, that's the double-edged blessing of being brought up in a compassionate and outwardly caring family. I am not always worthy of that responsibility others seem so willing to impose on me, but I must demonstrate spiritual leadership at all times. We cannot live in a constant state of crisis, because emotional exhaustion will eventually cause serious damage to the health of the unsupported. Not many people walk away unharmed. Love is an addiction, and caring for the loved one becomes a compulsion. Caring becomes a knowingly dangerous preoccupation, and yet one does not step away. Nothing prepares a person for the level of pressure that befalls them, no matter how strong their faith and love. Conversely, I am not good with normal life. For the most of my life, I would describe myself as having been successfully socially incompetent, unless someone takes pity on me. However, when even the most onerous duties are discharged with dignity, it is then that a great personal price must invariably be paid. Article 28. Dr. Morfydd Roberts, Carrickeinwen. Clinical Psychologist. Bellin Institute, 1997. Guest Speaker. Farmers Union Literary Society Annual Dinner. Speech entitled, "Only One Thought at a Time." Dr. Roberts began. If I ever come across a person who can hold two thoughts at a time, or think he can, inevitably he, I would guess, then I will call for a bigger man with a snappy dog and a pointy stick. I most certainly will. Because that person is probably an alien. Even people with dissociative diseases can only present with one identity at a time, no matter how quickly they transition from one to another. Our being is a singular entity. Our essence is singular, either a complete well-functioning unit, or a distressed wholeness. And therein lies a problem and a solution, which is a duality of crisis and calm. Only one thought can occupy our consciousness at any moment, and like a dissociated mind, thoughts can cascade through our conscious mind and shape our view of ourselves in the world. The nature of the thoughts that we choose to occupy our conscious thinking mind when we look at the world, either make it a place of challenge, or one of opportunity. Of course, being one of those people who probably falls within the mean, or is it median, I have shifted quite far from a socially acceptable norm and then back. I am certain that I have both delighted and disappointed the same person, and probably done both within a short period of time. There again, I am not a male. And unlike all men who would like to think of themselves as an alpha male, I am frequently torn apart by insecurities, because the world doesn't see me as I would like to be considered. We shift within normal parameters of social interaction by having fun, arguments and hopefully plenty of interesting discussions. We skid far from the norm when we are passionate about hobbies. Or, most wonderfully, another person. These are temporary shifts, and we almost always slide back to occupy the middle ground. However, as I mentioned above, we can slide to occupy extremes and stay there for quite a while until friends intervene, or we experience an epiphany, or we are unable to find a way out. If it is the latter, then we must temporarily set up camp, lost in an unfamiliar emotional and psychological landscape. One outside of the guidance of our normal compass. In all the places we occupy in our mind's perspective of ourselves in the world, there is always one constant, and that is what is occupying or preoccupying our conscious mind. It is that preoccupation which dominates all, and colors, filters or even distorts the information that is being perceived. The problems frequently arise from what we do with that information. We look for facts that confirm our inadequacy. Or, bigotedly, we ignore facts that demonstrate the incorrectness of that view. In other words, we are shaping the outside world to confirm how we feel. This is called saliency, and it is something we push to extremes in order to confirm facts or prejudices, and generate what we confirm to be our truth. This is the politics of the mind, and it is how we frequently negotiate with ourselves. Depression and joy are not opposites in how the conscious mind works. They are merely different perceptions processed by the same mechanism. It is the quality of the thoughts that we allow to occupy that central frame that dictates poor or good mental life, self-esteem, self-confidence, and consequent physical health. The quality of the thinking is secondary to what we think upon. Regular sliding creates an easy and overused path to smoking, drugs, or any other form of addiction. Remember good Christmases. We have many of our memories of Christmas, and some of them sullied by arguments or, worst of all, loss. And yet there have been many good Christmases, too drunk, the turkey wouldn't fit in the oven, playing games, slipping into bed with your loved one. Or, if he is not available, your own husband. Therefore, the quality of our lives is determined by the thoughts we allow to occupy that space between our ears and behind our eyes. That central point of control of ourself. If we do not focus on thoughts of quality, then we are failing ourselves. Article 29. This was a controversial talk given by Peter Halliwell, poet, at Lansdowne Evangelical Group meeting in Penmynnydd, Anglesey in May 2015. The talk was titled, "Well and Truly Fugged Up." Mr. Halliwell began. We all deserve to have a better life, if only we would just allow it for ourselves. Why can we not abandon ourselves to the possibility of joy? Nothing fills the deepest existential void of doubt and despair better than laughter. When you laugh, you cannot engage in any useful or self-damaging thinking. Remember, the most injurious act you can engage in to punish yourself is to accept the gift of a bad thought that others cruelly decide to impose on you, and that you accept without argument, and then shape your self-worth around it. Laughter is abandon in its purest form, surely? Nothing can intrude or creep in and hide in your void, without wishing to sound too rude. Your void, existential void, is where your misery resides heavily, and claims to be resistant to all persuasion to leave, so it would insist. I tend to believe that professional Freudians and cognitivists make money negotiating with you about the value of the contents of your existential void. It's very depressing overall, for the conversations gather around what has been making you miserable. I readily accept that both cognitivists can achieve major breakthroughs in 6 sessions, and Freudians in 6 years, if what I see in films about New York Freudians and their patients is correct. There is a school of psychology called humanist, which focuses on helping a troubled individual with daily life, and does not delve too deeply into what is making the person unhappy, rather it focuses on what can make them happy. Clinical psychology acknowledges the mental fog that lies between an individual and happiness by engaging directly with the habits that are the basis of unhappiness. First, you should consider there to be 2 main types of depression: acute and chronic. Chronic depression is long-standing, and is a deeply embedded psychology that can either be a long-term immersion in hopelessness or injurious brain chemistry. On the other hand, acute depression is a temporary affair, when, for various reasons, you find yourself fugged good and proper and end up temporarily inert and bereft. Acute depression can develop into an illness with a determined personality of its own, skilled in fighting off any opportunities for joyous imaginings and positive outcomes. You can start from a position of hopeful imagining, and find that your depressed state will fight you tooth and claw to fug you good and proper. Your depression will not be looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, unless it's a teenager in his dad's car heading straight for you. Humans are wonderful problem solvers, even if we're using that skill to fight off being cured of being depressed. However, when depression becomes your constant companion, either it invests heavily in you, or you in it. Simply put, your existential void is full of the most inert entity known to the mind and is beyond physics, fug. From the moment it makes itself at home, you are fugged up. If you do not attend to it with awareness, and attack it with endeavor, or have good friends who will do that for you, then you will be well and truly fugged. Your view of the world changes because of the fug now occupying your porthole on the world. That porthole is multimodally fugged. Seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling. Your view of the world becomes fugged. Depression can be viewed as an overfamiliarization with misery that is all-encompassing. All the information coming in has all the good bits filtered out or distorted, reduced to a meaning appropriate to the needs of that bastard black dog, that will ignore or distort to satisfy its gluttony on your misery. In fact, that bastard dog's gluttony for misery can be murderous unless one intervenes. As mentioned elsewhere in so many papers, the conscious mind can only attend to one thought or object at a time. However, unlike the conscious mind, the unconscious is unreachable, and cannot be negotiated with at all. Interestingly, during the Second World War, we are told that the incidence of mental health problems, or nerves, was low, because I suppose one did not need to imagine that someone out there was out to injure you, because we knew well enough that someone was indeed out there with bullets, bombs and a definite intent. Therefore, it is important to realize, or have someone point it out to you, that you are indeed fugged and not seeing the world as it is. At one time or other we can all say that, I'm fugged, you're fugged, we're all fugged. Inertia is an obvious symptom, an inability to begin or complete a project as simple as just taking out rubbish to the bin. We can only hold one object in focus central to our conscious viewing of the world, and if we are smart and do not wish to have that bastard dog as a companion, then a solution can in most cases be straightforward. Replace that thought, get rid of a bad idea with a better idea. Dance, hold hands, make cakes, go to the movies, embrace good amusing company, and focus entirely on making the best cakes and not shooting yourself down just because it's what you've always done. Above all, one sure way of getting rid of the incumbent black dog is with love and with laughter. You cannot think properly when you are laughing or in love, because it is a transcendent state. Being without knowing. You are in a state of euphoria, and not in this world. If you have ever found yourself well and truly fugged, power yourself up with laughter and imagination. Finally, the Higgs boson. When scientists were seeking the financial backing of the UK government for participation in the building and development of the Large Hadron Collider project in CERN, Switzerland, they had to persuade the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, of its scientific value and its importance for Britain. Sensibly, the first approach was to the then Science Minister, Michael Waldegrave, who told them that if they wanted his assistance to sell the Higgs boson to the PM, then he wanted an explanation on a single side of A4 paper. The scientists went away and pontificated, returning with rather less than a page of scribbles. Imagine, they said, an ordinary person walking across a room jam-packed with people looking for the exit door. The person would move around and through groups of people with barely a ripple. Imagine then, Mrs. Thatcher walking into that same room. What do you think would happen? Of course, the entire room would be immediately aware of her, and drawn toward her. Now imagine such a significant particle moving across the cosmos. Other particles become aware of it by its physical properties and are drawn to it en masse. Thus matter is created, and stars, planets and all manner of objects and forces are born from that. It is one of the most important fundamental particles in the universe. The funding was forthcoming, as was proof of the existence of the Higgs boson many years later. So, are you a miserable or a happy boson? Guess which one attracts love and laughs. I haven't been fugged in a while actually. Have you? The meeting broke up soon after, and Mr. Halliwell was not invited to read his controversial poetry. Article 30. A talk on social retail perspectives given by Dr. P. Higgins, clinical psychologist, to Clannon Hennedell WI, Autumn 2009. Titled, No More Special Than a Sales Day Sentinel. Dr. Higgins began. To recalibrate any sense of specialness I might subscribe to, concerning myself and my place in the world, I allow myself to be brought to New Year sales by my wife. And don't for a moment think that I volunteer myself willingly. It'll be nice, she'd said. No, it isn't. I don't have the stamina for shopping. I have never been possessed of the stamina for shopping. That gene is missing, not triggered, or thankfully faulty. I once passed a Saturday afternoon in ambulatory and sedentary purgatory with a girlfriend who wanted to buy white cotton knickers that were not made in China. A quick job and then off for a walk, I thought. When a lot of us men think of knickers, white cotton or not, there is a degree of titillation, I won't deny. It didn't last long. I quickly realized that walking through lingerie departments trying to find a pair of white cotton knickers that were not made in China was a near futile activity for me. During that endless afternoon, my lexicon of despair broadened considerably. The slough of despond by comparison was a place of jollity, full of hope and dancing polar bears off their heads on Haribo sweets. For my partner, it was an average Saturday afternoon shopping, which was a joyful activity all unto itself. Apparently. Like most males, I once possessed a ridiculous sense of self, which I later realized was something that women and cats tolerate while they train us to be obedient to their wiles. I did not realize just how ignorant I was, until it was pointed out to me in exquisite detail. The sales in land did no other final step for bringing males to heel, and removing any sense they may have of superiority in the sexes. Having spent 136 hours in the sales between 9 a.m. and lunchtime, forget lunch, I was enfeebled by the time we eventually arrived at Marks and Spencer's. There, I realized I was merely one of a number of sales day sentinels dispersed around M&S. Solitary, forlorn, exhausted. All clothing presented looked the same in the end. However, I still had the wherewithal to discriminate between a nice pillow, a duvet and a dress. Above all, my face hurt. Occasionally, I would share a few words of desperation with a fellow stationary sentinel, while waiting for my next looks nice on you exercise to begin. Like most intimate human conversations, what is not said is the most profoundly articulate. We were broken, and realized that beyond mere self-delusion, we were nothing. Not special. Not unique. Just trained into obedience, by being introduced to futility and despair, and being obliged to embrace it as our natural state. There are occasions when we are indulged in short bouts of alpha maleness before being brought to heel, and reminded of our position in life. In the sales, the sentinel stands guard over the handbag, while the partner performs her never-ending retail dance. I don't remember if my then girlfriend found knickers that were not made in China, but at least I was rewarded on that occasion, by being allowed to go to the pick and mix stand in Woolworths.